Now, David Hume's treatment of induction may either beg the question or just be trivially true. Even if it's neither, to be fair and to be sure, I will sketch an argument and will only be a sketch of an argument that we can resort to probability that avoids his critique. David Hume engages in begging the question insofar as he rules out the possibility of necessary empirical truths. He engages in an argument that's trivially true insofar as his argument against induction amounts to demonstrating that no inductive argument can justify induction. And again, even if neither is the case, are there good responses to David Hume? I believe so, but we will only sketch an argument or arguments to this effect. To understand all of this, we will explore how Hume distinguishes between relations of ideas and matters of fact. This distinction, in fact, however, cannot be justified through Hume's very own criteria. Next, we will examine the distinction between deduction versus induction. Here, Hume is correct in believing justifying induction through matters of fact will be circular. Nevertheless, if there could be or are necessary empirical truths, and Hume's criteria is erroneous and cannot rule them out, then induction may, in fact, escape Hume's critique. All the objects of human reason may naturally be divided into two kinds, relations of ideas and matters of fact, according to Hume. The former is certain, as they concern the logical status of ideas vis-a-vis each other. It's something known as true just by thinking. A denial would result in a straight-out logical contradiction. To claim, for example, that a bachelor is married is contradictive, since, by definition, a bachelor is unmarried. The claim amounts to the proposition, an unmarried man is married. In contrast, a matter of fact is an empirical truth discovered in the world. Hume says denying a matter of fact will never imply a contradiction, so a matter of fact can be otherwise. To claim, for example, that the gravitational constant could be different from what it is doesn't result in a contradiction. We can logically entertain that denial. Although Hume takes it that relations of ideas and matters of fact exhaust human thinking, this claim itself is neither a relation of ideas nor a matter of fact. Since we can deny that this is exhaustive without a logical contradiction, it's not the former. Since it's not something we can discover by empirical research in the world, it's certainly not the latter. Therefore, David Hume's claim is not true by his very own standard. Since his criteria of knowledge may not be exhaustive, there may be other forms of knowledge. And this can include the possibility that there are truths discovered empirically that are necessary. It may be necessary, for example, that gravity, or should I say just matter, necessarily acts the way it does given its existence and its nature, even if we can never understand why it acts that way precisely. Insofar as Hume simply denies the possibility of necessary empirical truths because they are neither a subset of relations of ideas nor matters of fact, as he thinks of these two things, he fallaciously begs the question, i.e. assumes as true what's under dispute. There's a self-defeating nature to Hume's claim that relations of ideas and matters of fact exhaust human thinking. Now, before considering David Hume's thoughts on logic, let's review the difference between deduction and induction. Recall that a deductive argument, if it's valid with true premises, guarantees its conclusion as true. What's being applied is the dictum de omni et nolo. Whatever is affirmed or denied of a logical whole must be affirmed or denied of the parts of that whole. Socrates is mortal, for example, because he is a man and men are mortal. Here the logical whole is of mortality, with men being a subset of it, and Socrates being a member of men. In contrast, an inductive argument is ampliative. That is, it moves beyond the scope of its premises. It generalizes from particular cases to make probable sweeping claims. To conclude, for example, that a ball thrown into the air will eventually fall down because I've observed instances of this in the past is an induction. What David Hume is surely right about is that induction cannot be justified simply with matters of fact, as long as they contain no necessity, without a viciously circular argument. David Hume writes, all of our experimental conclusions proceed upon the supposition that the future will be conformable to the past, end quote. Since, for example, I believe that the future will resemble the past, I infer that after throwing a ball into the air, it will eventually fall down. Put differently, I believe that my induction is valid because induction is dependable. However, how can I know the future will resemble the past or that induction is dependable? It cannot be validly argued that the future will resemble the past because, as a matter of fact, it did in the past, nor can it be validly argued that induction is dependable because it was dependable before. For that, reasons Hume, must be evidently going in a circle and taking for granted which is the very point in question, end quote. Indeed, when the question is of justifying induction, induction cannot be validly justified by arguments that already presuppose induction's dependability. It begs the question to argue that induction is true because we can induce it as true, as that inducing takes for granted that induction is true. Now that's all true enough, but it's a trivial point. Previous observations may have had y always following x. Presently, we may be observing x. Then we conclude that y will follow. As a deduction, strictly speaking, this is invalid. No deduction as such can be amplitive. A premise about the past cannot, by itself, be taken as declaring something about the future. When I have found in all past instances such sensible qualities cojoined with such secret powers, says Hume, this claim is categorically different from claiming similar sensible qualities will always be cojoined with similar secret powers. So the fact that y and x have been cojoined in the past is not the same as claiming they will invariably be in the future. However, the argument that y will follow is inductive, since the conclusion is amplitive. Insofar as induction is acceptable, the argument is reasonable in being probable. An amplitive argument can never be justified with deduction. Hume is pointing out a trivial truth that there is a difference between propositions concerning the past versus concerning the future. The former cannot be used to deductively infer the latter. Likewise, there's a difference between propositions concerning the past versus propositions that concern what always will be. To be sure, though, Hume's radical claim is that induction itself cannot be justified. So, if induction cannot be justified, we cannot be sure that y will probably follow. Hume's radical claims go this far. The sun rising tomorrow has an equal chance of it turning into cheese tomorrow. Recall that I'm attempting to argue that Hume's treatment of induction may either beg the question or be trivially true. Arguing that induction can be justified because it seems to have particularly worked in the past or with particular cases does beg the question, as Hume argues. However, just as it's trivial to point out that induction and deduction are unalike, pointing out that inductive inferences alone cannot justify inductive inferences is trivial. Yet, insofar as there are necessary empirical truths, arguing for induction doesn't need to resort to the fallacious circular argument. While we may never understand gravity or matter, for example, with complete clarity, to the extent that there's necessary empirical truths, we may know that gravity or matter, after empirically discovering its existence or their existence, must of necessity behave in certain ways, in the past or future, given possession of certain necessary properties making it gravity or matter versus something else, which would have different necessary properties making it not gravity or not matter. Such a possibility is grounded in a prior metaphysical claim of necessities being a part of empirical reality. Even so, Hume claims that only matters of ideas contain necessity. Thus, since empirical observations only contain matters of fact, and there is no necessity to them, we cannot claim past observations will apply to the future. Hume further believes necessity is identical to logical necessity only. Anything that can be denied without contradiction is not a necessity. However, Hume's criteria that blocks out the possibility of empirically necessary truth itself begs the question. For as I argued, his distinction between relations of ideas and matters of fact is false, even on its own criteria. Necessity may also be broader than what Hume suggests. I can deny gravity as a force of physics without a logical contradiction, but it still may be necessary that gravity, given its reality, behaves the way it does. For my understanding of gravity may be too limited to fully understand it, and so just because I could deny features of it without an immediately obvious logical contradiction may be the result of ignorance. Or, much more importantly, physical necessity may not just demand logical necessity. Now, contemporary Aristotelian scholasticism can provide an alternative answer. Induction always comes with risks, so to speak. By its very nature, it is not deduction. We cannot expect induction to do things it cannot. However, insofar as there is such a thing as essences and natures, that there are cause and effect relations and so forth, there is reason to think we are justified in using induction. Indeed, in the process of abstraction, We focus in about the nature of a thing by leaving behind such things as change or other contingencies, and this allows us to legitimately think about future happenings based on past happenings. What's more, what needs to be explained is why the universe is so orderly. If David Hume was right that we have no good reason to think causality is a feature in our universe, then we should consider what a universe without causality would probably look like. Since it would likely look radically, very radically different from ours, we should infer that it is improbable that everything is due to chance with no causality. Without causality, what are the odds that I can be talking to you right now on YouTube? Even at a more basic level, so to speak, someone might argue that induction is a basic type of inference that needs no added support. There are inferences that just cannot be justified without further inferences to avoid an infinite regress. Perhaps induction is one of them. Or consider a pragmatic point of view, for example, Hans Richtenbach, who suggested that induction seems to work and that's sufficient. Yet for my money, there are at least two problems with this reply. First, what matters is the epistemic truth of the matter, not just what works. Second, his view only dealt with long-range frequencies to the exclusion of justifying a conclusion about particulars. On this account, I have no reason to think that a particular steel frame will hold up a building any more than if it were made from paper. However, modern probability theory can help us address David Hume as well. The move from a sample to a conclusion about the population as a whole can use mathematical a priori principles. By using the law of large numbers, we know that a large random sample will mirror the population. But if that's the case, and it is, David Hume is not as much of a threat to induction as someone might at first believe. Conclusions about populations are justified. Finally, consider Andrew Yonen's book Matter in Mathematics. David Hume wants induction and causality to be explained, but they are doing the explaining of the uniformity of nature. Induction is not what is needed to be explained, it's the actual uniformity of nature. Hume actually has things totally reversed. Quote, "It is a uniformity that requires explanation. To ask how we can explain induction is to miss the point that induction is the explanation, not the thing needing explanation." To reiterate, this video has been a sketch, and only a sketch, of an argument against David Hume's treatment of induction. The physicist Heisenberg once said that if we took David Hume seriously, then we might as well say goodbye to physics giving us any knowledge about the world whatsoever. Heisenberg even said that quantum mechanics fits nicely with an Aristotelian understanding. Now, I am the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. If you enjoyed this video, please consider buying me a cup of coffee or two. I would really much appreciate it. If you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and signing up to my newsletter by visiting my website, amateurlogician.com. If you want more videos on David Hume and philosophy, consider leaving a comment below. Share me your thoughts on induction. Do you agree with David Hume? Do you not agree with him? What are good arguments for David Hume and against him? In any case, thanks for watching. I very much appreciate your viewership. Good luck to you and be well.